Very excited to be, as we continue the show, by Mariah Parker, who is a commissioner down in Athens, Georgia, also a rapper, also a PhD student, also an organizer. There's many superlatives I'm sure I could continue to throw on here, but maybe what's more important is that we bring her into the show. Really, really happy that you're able to join us, Mariah.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. It's good
to see
you
again. No, the pleasure
again.
is all ours. The pleasure is all ours. You know, I wanted to start here with a story I just saw that seems particularly relevant to me this week because I think it was yesterday, in fact, in Congress, there was the hearing on H.R. 40, the bill that would study reparations. And in some of the work that you've been working on there in Athens, there was also what I would consider a relatively major admission that came from the commission there in Athens, apologizing and recognizing what, in my view, can only really be called as a terroristic sort of act, what happened there in Linnentown in the 1960s. Maybe the best place to start is if you could give us some context for what actually took place, and then I think I'd like to move into some of what happened this week.
Sure. So in the 1960s, the University of Georgia conspired with the city of Athens and several legislators at the state and federal level to use eminent domain to destroy a Black neighborhood that was located pretty centrally in town as one of the smallest, or one of the strongest, but smallest enclaves of Black home ownership at the time, in a place where restrictive covenants still made it such that folks couldn't buy properties in these white neighborhoods. They came together and, working class Black folks were able to build a community. However, under urban renewal and in the interest of slum clearance, as they said, they moved people out through controlled fires, through intimidation, through all manner of white supremacist terroristic tactics, displaced these families, and many of these families unraveled in the aftermath of having their homes seized and their community torn apart. And so one of the families that lived in Linnentown was able to move their house rather than see it burned to the ground before them, like a lot of folks who were living in Linnentown at the time, moved their house across town into my district that I represent in the east side of Athens. And one of my constituents, 2 years ago, came to me and told me this story. And ever since then, we've been trying to connect with other descendants of Linnentown, other former residents who were children in the 1960s and are now, in their 60s and 70s, to get this story out and also understand what redress and recognition could look like on their terms. And so a year ago, I introduced a resolution calling for the University of Georgia to partner with the city of Athens, not only apologize for the taking and the destruction of Linnentown, but offer reparations in the form of participatory budgeting, of actual wealth redistribution to the families who's lost that generational wealth with their homes being taken from them, and other measures to help heal those who suffered considerable trauma as a result of this conspiracy. At the time, it was rejected by the Athens Clarke County Commission, but after a year of working with our attorneys, working with community organizers, doing a reparational audit to understand how much generational wealth was lost, figuring out within the confines of the Georgia State Constitution how we could get material redress for the losses these people suffered, we were able to pass the first act of reparations in the state of Georgia on Tuesday that grants participatory budgeting powers to the Linnentown committee, the descendants that who were impacted by the erasure of their neighborhood and of their homes in the 1960s. And so they are the only committee in the local government that can give direct recommendations on how we spend our money in the community in order to see that we have housing justice for future generations of Black Athenians, to see that other compounding issues of poverty, of income inequality, of lack of social services are redressed such that our communities moving forward are whole. And so it's been one of my greatest honors as an organizer to work with these folks, to learn from these folks, these elders in our community that went through this, and we have a lot of work to do from here. But I'm taking a little second to celebrate. It feels good.
I think you should take a second to celebrate. I mean, it feels, I'm not even from Athens, and it feels great to me. I mean, it really spoke to me. I'm from Charlottesville, Virginia, another southern college town, supposedly liberal. And it just blew my mind because they did the same thing in Vinegar Hill. at almost the same time, maybe 10 years earlier, same playbook, and you just see the impact over so many years of the things that have been done to Black America. And that's one thing I maybe wonder about just going through this whole process for you. What are you reflecting on in terms of how we're addressing the issue of reparations in general? I mean, now it's coming up again before Congress, and I don't know if they will pass H.R. 40. Perhaps they will. I don't know what we'll get by that. But I think the conversation about what it could look like, what it should be, and the importance of reparations is now back in the, maybe to some degree, in the public eye. So I just wonder, having gone through this, how you're now sort of reflecting on the maybe broader process that I think all of us in Black America are consistently thinking about for the right reasons.
Yeah, definitely. As we navigated this process and bumped up against some of the limitations put on us by the Georgia State Constitution, we have a clause in it called the Gratuities Clause that prevents us as a local government from giving direct money to private citizens. So like right now in coronavirus, we're not able to give stimmy checks like the federal government can because of the Gratuities Clause. And so our only recourse was to give these folks the power to help shape the way we spend our money on public goods. And so our investments in affordable housing, our investments in infrastructure like municipal broadband, our investment in social services, our investment in youth development and education programs. And so when we talk about like what reparations can look like, I think this is an interesting and informative process for us, because while it would be great to give these folks the wealth that was taken from them, ultimately that in a sense prioritizes the private accumulation of capital and the continuation of capitalism, which is not something I personally am interested in. And so thinking about how reparations can also take the form of a reallocation and a reinvestment into communities that have been historically underfunded as a matter of white supremacy, as another way to go about that. I think the question has been asked often, what can reparations look like? And I think we have provided a model, at least at the local level here, of something that could be done nationally, perhaps in tandem with actual, checks in the bank for folks to go out and buy a house or put down payment, on a car or get that education that's been holding them back. And so we are pushing as our next steps to have the Georgia State Legislature create an authority and like a committee of some sort to think about what reparations can look like as a state, and perhaps carve out some leeway within the Georgia State Constitution to provide opportunity for us to do that material redress to the private individuals whose lives were ruined by urban renewal. But I think of those things working together might be a really interesting recipe for how reparations could play out at larger scales than the local. But for now, we are pleased with the work that we have done to see those communities reinvested in as a way of righting the wrongs that were done to them in decades past.
And as a commissioner, I think this is a really interesting initiative in many different ways. And it makes me also wonder, as someone else who also does not want to see capitalism strengthened, I think a lot of times when people are thinking about elected office, elected officials, people who are critical of capitalism, let me put it that way, there's a lot of focus on the limitations, which is right and real and relevant and important. But I'm wondering also how you're reflecting on, the role that someone can play that has, what I would call, let's say, non-sellout proclivities, somebody who's really trying to do the real thing, the role you can play and the things you can do in this kind of role.
Yeah, I mean, some of my proudest accomplishments as a commissioner were honestly the failures that I learned from, but also like in failing, changed the public discourse around certain ideas. And so like using the opportunity of having this platform, of having insiders' knowledge of how the government works and being able to serve as this bridge between radical demands by popular social movements to like the mechanisms of government, and sort of to show how these things can go from the ideal into the concrete, using that station to enliven conversations around what we as communities deserve, what is possible within local government, and like dreaming higher and bigger about what sorts of things can come from civic engagement. And so I try to use that as much as I can, knowing that planting that seed today of changing the way we think about things like police abolition or social housing, and the right to a fair living for every single person, no matter you work 40 hours a week and we don't work at all. Putting those ideas into the public discourse as a politician, 10 years from now, who knows how mainstreamed that idea might become in our community? Who knows what we might be talking about if that becomes normalized? Like, what new envelopes can we push with regards to not only how we talk about what we can do it for our community, but what we do, how that translates to actual policy. And so that's what I try to do outside, recognizing the lack of political will at times when comparing myself with some of my colleagues to do things like defund the police, knowing that pushing that conversation forward, using the power that I have as an elected official is still getting the ball rolling towards the policy prescriptions that our moment desperately calls for.
No, I think that's a critically important point, and I just wonder, maybe in the time that you have been a commissioner, how have you seen things shift in terms of consciousness? Obviously, quite a bit has happened in terms of the world itself.
I mean, I've seen a shift in the way that we as a government conceive our relationship to popular movements, creating new avenues for the public to engage in things like our budgeting processes, in collaboratively crafting policy and things like this that just didn't happen before, because there was this deeply ingrained divide between those who felt empowered and entitled to that kind of power and those that had to live the consequences of the policy that came from that. And so that shift, I think, has been really productive, and I hope to see it continue, to see a more activist form of government, and not simply one that is reactionary, responding to the failures of old, but like actually thinking forward with regards to what's possible, what we can get done, and working hand in hand with the folks that we represent to craft solutions rather than prescribe them to folks whose experience we don't understand.
One thing I want to also ask you, last week we had a special show. We were talking about Judas and the Black Messiah. You are also working in the cultural field. I mean, certainly you can tell me anything about the movie if you want to comment on it, but I'm also just curious your thoughts about the use of culture, especially in terms of engaging young people and the interaction between, they say, well, I don't know who says this, someone said it. It might actually be someone bad, so don't hold it to me, but politics is downstream of culture. And so I just wonder also some of your observations about how these two lanes can work together.
Yeah, I mean, as a hip hop artist, particularly in the pandemic, I wasn't as highly politicized when I started making music, but particularly during lockdown, where I'm not on tour anymore, I've been using the pen for popular political education more and more to educate my Instagram following, or people who I do a little live stream show for, or whoever, about the importance of how we make change through a general strike, or the importance of supporting striking workers, of debt abolition and debt cancellation as a way to also push for the provision of more public goods, free higher education, free healthcare, things like this. So using music as a way to entice people into conversation around not only public policy, but organizing and what that can look like in our communities. For folks that are just like, yo, the beat's dope and she's got bars, like that's ill. And then on their third or fourth listen, I'm like, oh, wait, you mean to tell me in like Denmark and South Korea, they gave everybody UBI during the pandemic and we ain't get shit? Like, maybe we should do that general strike thing she was talking about. So I think that the way that hip hop in particular operates through cadence, through repetition, through rhyme, through illusion, in a way that draws you in and requires multiple listens for you to sort of draw out the salient themes, I think is what I try to exploit in trying to transmit these messages to people about the importance of organizing and about public policy demands, I think, in the moment that we're in.
Well, I can only say right on to that. I appreciate that. I definitely appreciate everything that you're doing politically, culturally. I really appreciate you for joining us here on the show. I have seen you maybe think about running for Congress, so I'm excited to hear that as well, but really just appreciate you on so many levels. Thank you for joining us here on the Freedom Side, Mariah.
Pleasure to be with you. Thanks so much for your time.